Good morning. Oh, please.
Yeah. Okay. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are sitting at this moment in Africa, North America, and Europe. I know these are the three continents that we have people registering from. I know, for example, that it's 5 o'clock, about 5 o'clock Eastern time in the US, and we have colleagues awake at this time to attend this. I thank you very much for coming. My name is Christopher Isike, and I am director of the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria, ACSUS-UP, and on behalf of the center, I'm extremely pleased to formally welcome you to our first ACSUS-UP US Africa Diaspora Diplomacy Biennial Conference. It is indeed the first of our conference series on US Africa Diaspora Diplomacy and Soft Power. And going forward, we shall convene it every 2 years, one virtual and the other in person. So having welcomed everyone, let me recognize the presence of the champion VC of the University of Pretoria, Professor Tawana Kupe, who is also the brainchild of ACSUS as an idea. I also recognize the presence of the acting dean of the Faculty of Humanities, which houses ACSUS-UP, Professor Africa. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome also to our distinguished guest of honor and subject of conference, Professor Farooq Kperogi. He's a professor of journalism and emerging media at Kennesaw University in Georgia in the US. I see also our book reviewer, Dr. Danica Fleurs at the Institute of Future Media, Democracy and Society at Dublin City University. Our esteemed 12 panel chairs from South Africa, Nigeria, the US, and Australia. Thank you, I see you. And last but not least, I recognize the chair of this plenary session, my co-convener, Professor Toyin Falola, extraordinary professor, ACSUS-UP, and the Jacob and Frances Sanger Mossiker Chair in Humanities at the University of Texas, Austin, for writing the book that informed this conference and for his support in putting the conference together. Of course, I appreciate all members of our local organizing committee who did the hard work of turning ideas into reality. We shall mention your names at the end of the proceedings today when Professor Falola gives the closing remarks. So let me say a few words that ACSUS-UP is committed, to fostering knowledge-driven engagement between Africa and the US, giving the paucity of knowledge of the US, of America in the continent. To this end, one of our strategic goals is to promote American literacy in Africa. And we reason that the African diaspora are a critical conduit for transmitting this literacy, given their unique location in what Mensa metaphorically calls, the third space between Africa and the world. And in the context of this conference, the third space between Africa and the United States. In essence, Africans in the diaspora, even when they leave the continent, never actually leave, as many of them engage in a number of brain-sharing activities that result in brain gain for Africa, contrary to the brain drain argument. So, for example, apart from remittances, many of our academics and scientists who leave Africa and continue to work as academics and scientists abroad often give back their knowledge to the continent through research initiatives, joint programs, fellowships, network, and through multiple academic affiliations that enable them circulate and share knowledge in Africa. Some scholars have argued that this kind of brain sharing, particularly in the age of digitalization, broaden both the scope and the possibility of a win-win situation by sharing the academic and intellectual capacity of highly productive African academics, through capitalizing on collaboration between African universities and their diaspora scholars. Our conference co-convener, Professor Falola, is a classic example of this kind of brain gain for Africa. I mean, we can ask the question, can we really say that he has been a brain loss to Nigeria and Africa, generally, given the numerous ways that he has contributed to scholarship across the continent? I think the answer is no. It's been real value add. even though he's lived in the United States for over 35 years. Now, going back to the third space thesis, which makes the African diaspora feel a sense of belonging and connection to both their countries of origin and countries of residence. The deep knowledge they have, both of both worlds, makes the African diaspora a conveyor of knowledge of both worlds, which we can harvest as low-hanging fruits to promote American literacy in Africa. This is why we decided to have a conference series on the US-Africa diaspora, as the African diaspora in the US have a unique positionality that enable their agency in fostering brain gain, development, diplomacy, and democracy promotion in Africa. The question of what African diaspora does, what they do in promoting democracy and development in Africa through their positionality in both the US and Africa, inform the theme of this first ACSUS-UP US Africa Diaspora Biennial Conference, which is Farooq Kperogi, the Digital Age and US Africa Diaspora Diplomacy. In the book that Professor Falola wrote, he uses the specific case of Farooq Kperogi to examine the Nigerian diaspora, how they bridge the physical space between them and their home country by creating a virtual community and using digitalization to talk about the nation and its failures, possibilities, and promises. It addresses the question of Black culture, engaged citizenship, the decay in basic and tertiary education, English as a national language, media, digitalization, democracy, and the evolving political activism in Nigeria. As Falola summed it, Kperogi's relentless and extensive writings on Nigeria make him a preeminent figure whose standpoint is valuable to understanding modern Nigeria. He is therefore a fitting US African diasporan whose works in brain sharing and democracy and development agency provide an avenue for understanding Nigeria in the US and US in Nigeria from the vantage point of an academic giant who straddles both worlds. We have assembled, we received 60 brilliant papers for this conference, which will dissect emerging issues around the theme from social media, digitalization, social change, diaspora diplomacy, soft power, citizenship, journalism, to global politics, conflict, technology, and the future of the world. I enjoin you to open your minds and spare us the time to share from the knowledge that we shall share and co-create from this conference in the form of an edited book by Professor Falola and myself. Once again, I thank you for coming and I say welcome. I will now hand over to Professor Falola, who is chair of this plenary session, to tell us how to proceed further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Isike, and good morning to all of you. We are very grateful to the University of Pretoria, the center, the management, the Vice Chancellor, and all the administrators. It's my pleasure now to invite Professor Kupe, the Vice Chancellor and Principal, to give his opening remark. Professor Kupe, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Professor Falola, for that very warm welcome, and greetings to everyone. Our conference conveners, Professor Christopher Isike, Director of ACSUS-UP, and Professor Toyin Falola, Extraordinary Professor, ACSUS-UP, and the Jacob and Frances Sanger Mossiker Chair in the Humanities at the University of Texas, Austin. And most importantly, to our conference presenters and to everyone attending this important conference, we thank you for the time to be part of what we are doing at the University of Pretoria to promote US literacy in Africa. On behalf of the University of Pretoria, I welcome you all once again to the first ACSUS-UP US Africa Diaspora Diplomacy Biennial Conference on the theme Farooq Kperogi, the Digital Age and US Africa Diaspora Diplomacy. This is indeed in line with the vision of ACSUS-UP to be the premier African knowledge creation hub in the field of South Africa, Africa, and United States studies and cooperation. The idea of African universities studying the United States, which was my brainchild when I established the first African Center for the Study of the US at the University of the Witwatersrand, otherwise known as WITS, in 2018, was intended to not only return the penetrative gaze, or if you like, do that reverse gaze the US has had on Africa over 70 years now, but also to become a platform for understanding the US as a way of understanding ourselves in Africa, given the cultural connections between Africa and the US. As Professor Isike indicated, the African diaspora in the US occupy a third geographic space between the continent and the US, and therefore an important bridge for understanding the connections between both geographies. It is in this light one appreciates the significance of discussing the African diaspora in the US as a way of promoting US literacy in Africa. Discussing questions around who the African diaspora in the US are, what they do in terms of their socio-economic and political roles they play both for Africa and the US, and their agency as foreign policy actors are critical in our quest to foster knowledge-driven engagements between Africa and the US, which is the motto of ACSUS-UP, and the big picture goal of the idea behind establishing more of these centers across Africa. As chair of the advisory board of ACSUS-UP, I'm aware that we've already helped to establish 2 more of US studies centers in East Africa, at the University of Nairobi in Kenya, and Makerere University in Uganda, who are also our strategic partners more broadly. And before the end of the year, ACSUS-UP shall help to establish 1 in West Africa, specifically in Nigeria. And also we have a lot of strategic partners in Nigeria, at the University of Lagos, Ibadan, and I was with the Vice Chancellors in Brussels last week. The goal here is to have at least 1 study US center in each of the 5 sub-regions of Africa by the end of 2024. These centers will form a network of US study centers in Africa that can leverage the network platform in future to develop an African policy template for engaging the US and other world powers. This is in line with our strategic goal number 5, which is active community engagement hub that fosters intercontinental South-North conversations and policy outputs on mutual challenges and innovation prospects. Why is this important? Apart from the power imbalance between the US and Africa, and remember here in the US, we're talking about a country, but a major country and a major power. In Africa, we're talking about a continent of 54 nations, which is reflected in numerous US-Africa policies developed by the US for Africa with no input from the continent. Knowledge generation through African study centers of the US will play a key role in informing US policies and strategies towards Africa. In essence, from studying Africa through the over 40 African studies centers in the country, the US has generated knowledge that drive their engagement with Africa. Africa, by comparison, has not even scratched the surface of studying the US, a world power with which our continent shares numerous political, military, social, economic, cultural, academic, and environmental interests. And by saying so, I'm not saying that these interests are shared or mutually beneficial. They are actually skewed because of the power imbalances between that the US as a country and Africa as a continent and its individual countries. The result is that Africa engages from a knowledge deficit position, which poses a significant disadvantage in terms of understanding and leveraging Africa-US relations and opportunities, informing foreign policy and having more meaningful collaborations with the US. By meaningful here, I'm suggesting all of those things, like substantive, mutually beneficial, reducing the imbalances, and actually, in a sense, contributing to a different world order. This is what we're trying to correct through the ACSUS-UP mandate, given Africa's growing role and importance in the changing geopolitical world order. World order might be changing, but change does not just benefit you. You actually have to take an active part in that change and be a driver and an agent of change for yourself. This necessitates the urgency and importance of the creation of Africa-generated knowledge and more nuanced understanding of the US as a nation and society, to inform African thinking, actions, and interactions, from political relations through economic and trade relations to cultural intersections, including cultural diplomacy and exchanges. As we all know, the AGOA deal is now under discussion and under revision. Now, the question is, are we sufficiently, from a knowledge point of view, organized and positioned to negotiate the best deal for the African continent and its constituent countries? The answer, right, as we sit right now, actually is a no. And so the urgency again doubles up. The African diaspora in the US, which makes significant contributions and impact in the US, are critical to this project. And this is why we welcome the theme of our first ACSUS-UP US-Africa Diplomacy Biennial Conference, which we shall hold, as biennial implies, every 2 years. The next one shall be in person in 2025. And as Professor Isike has mentioned, this year's theme, Farooq Kperogi, the digital age and US-Africa diaspora diplomacy, is profound in that it straddles two components of the US-Africa strategy of the Biden administration: fostering democracy in Africa and supporting digitalization in the continent. We also saw these two issues reiterated in the US-Africa Leaders Summit in December 2022, where President Biden announced the launch of a new digital transformation with Africa initiative. According to the White House, this is a signature initiative of the Biden-Harris administration, which is intended to expand digital access and literacy and strengthen digital enabling environments across the continent. Working with Congress, this initiative intends, we're told, to invest over $354 million and facilitate over $454 million, of course, in financing for Africa, in line with the African Union's digital transformation strategy and the US strategy toward Africa. At the summit, we also saw the creation of a President's Advisory Council on African Diaspora as an indicator of the Biden administration's efforts to engage and embrace America's African diaspora. Before then, on the African side, we've seen the African Union declare the African diaspora as the 6th sub-region of Africa, also to underscore the significance of the African diaspora globally. So colleagues, I need not belabor the point of how compelling the African diaspora in the US are to both Africa and the US. I'm sure you will have enough issues on the subject using the case study of Professor Farooq Kperogi to dissect and understand how Africans in the US continue to back the continent through sharing their knowledge on teething challenges in the continent around some of its priority areas, including democracy promotion through citizen activism using digital media. Indeed, American academia annually benefits from one of Africa's most underrated exports, brain power. And the African diaspora in the United States remains largely untapped by the continent in its quest for influence and agency in global politics. As Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria, I hereby declare this conference open and wish you fruitful deliberations, which I'm sure will result in useful policy and publication outcomes for ACSUS-UP and presenters at this conference. Thank you again, Professor Falola, for giving me this opportunity to open the conference.
Professor Kupe, we are very grateful for your generous remarks, for your contributions to the success of this conference, for your support, for telling us about the expansion of the project on the US and Africa. We remain very grateful, and we cannot thank you enough. It's my pleasure to invite Professor Sandy Africa, the Acting Dean, Faculty of Humanities, University of Pretoria. Sandy, please welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Falola. Thank you also for this opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities. Greetings to everyone who's attending today. We're very proud of the initiative, the launch of our biennial conference of the ACSUS. We look forward to this initiative becoming part of the tradition, not only of the Faculty of Humanities, but of the university, because whilst the center is located in the Faculty of Humanities, it's really just an administrative design, and we are engaged through the center in a transdisciplinary manner in collaborating with the other 8 faculties of the University of Pretoria as we reach out to friends and colleagues across the globe, many of whom I'm so delighted to see here participating today, as I am to see so many good colleagues from other institutions from around South Africa. Professor Kupe has so holistically framed the role of these centers that are burgeoning across the continent, and Professor Isike has also laid the basis for what will follow in the deliberations of this conference. So I do not need to dwell on that. But I think it is so exciting that the theme for this conference, which is framed in the context of the very thought-provoking work of Professor Kperogi, actually deals with such a critical matter of our time, the role of the media and the place and position of social media. And I, out of curiosity, went and read up some of his works. And I know, for example, that Professor Falola too has been engaging around these questions. And I think that this is the kind of very apt contribution that Africa and the African diaspora can make to global debates of relevance, not only to ourselves who happen to have the privilege of sitting and reflecting on these issues, but of future generations, because they begin to reframe the ways in which questions of society, questions of humanity can be seen. And I'm particularly energized by the decolonial and progressive epistemological frameworks that I see that so many of the topics of this conference suggest. So I think we can all look forward to an exciting set of deliberations, debates, contestations around ideas. And like Professor Kupe and like the chairs and conveners, thank everyone for being part of this hybrid conference, and want to add my voice in wishing you all well with the deliberations. Thank you, Professor Falola.
Thank you very much. And Africa, we cannot thank you enough for your warmth, for the inspiration you have given us, for the energy, and for sustaining. Do I need to start all over because maybe I was muted by the host?
No, I think someone, I don't know how that happened, but you can just quickly say that again. Thank you.
Oh, I thank Professor Sandy Africa for the warmth and brilliance of her presentation, for the support for the center and this conference. It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Danica Floss to talk about the book. Thank you.
Sorry, it's my utmost pleasure to be here today, and I'm joining from Dublin. yeah, I actually first scheduled the wrong time zone, which happens a lot to me because I'm sort of commuting between Australia, Dar es Salaam mostly, and Dublin, which is a lot of commuting right now. In any case, it's my utmost pleasure to be here, and it's my honor to comment on this brilliant book. I will say first a couple of things from my perspective, which is, well, first of all, not the perspective speaking from the US. I've lived in Sub-Saharan Africa, but in East Africa, not in Nigeria so far. So it's not this diaspora perspective, but I guess due to conversations with friends and colleagues, I gained some insights, at least in the book, and Toyin Falola's work definitely provided me with insights on that. I will then say something about the gaps in the research that are being addressed from my perspective and from the perspective of the research that we're doing here at our center, but also from the perspective of the research that I've been doing so far with colleagues, mostly from the West, admittedly, or from the global North, depending on how you want to frame it, on digital media landscapes, digital activism, and diverse spheres for deliberation and communication. And lastly, I guess I will unfold something about, I wouldn't even frame it as friendly fire. It's not fire at all. At the end of the day, I guess it's suggestions for further extensions of those perspectives and for interactions and collaborations. And maybe also for interactions and collaborations between this beautiful island that I'm now living on, which is also a post-colonial state, but in a weird way. So we got rid of the empire, but we're part of the EU, so sort of a very different perspective. So speaking from this beautiful island, which sort of perspectives I am seeing at the end of the day for further extensions of this work, for collaborations, maybe also between the EU and the US and Africa, and this threefold connection. I first had planned like sort of a sophisticated presentation, but then I remembered some sort of issues with connection in these large Zoom meetings, and then decided to more or less speak from my notes that I have next to me. But the presentation was entitled Unfolding a 3- or 4-fold complex relationships, depending on how we see it, and this sort of unfolds, the learning effects, but also the gaps in the research that are being addressed in this book. So in the first instance, I think we have a threefold very important discussion and deliberation that is being unfolded here in this book, and that extended or extends existing perspectives on deliberation in public spheres and digital public spheres, but also in general in digitalized democracies and digitalized political systems. So there's a broad and involving research on political science and political communication, but on the one hand, there's a disconnect to research on political culture in general. So this is an issue that is prominently being addressed in this book, and that was a great pleasure to read. Secondly, there is a disconnect that is particularly or specifically being addressed with regards to the disconnect between not only to political culture as such, but also to political cultures in post-colonial, from a post-colonial perspectives and in post-colonial contexts. And I guess this is a particularly important contribution also for Western researchers employing this line of research, or for Northern Globe researchers. I'm always feeling uncomfortable with this terminology. So first of all, with regards to the context and seeing the work in the perspective, in the cultural perspective also of Nigerian society. I'm just going to highlight a few insights. I'm obviously not the expert on Nigerian society or culture here in the space. There will be other contributions that will be prominently addressing this issue. But the insights, particularly from a Nigerian perspective and embracing this, that were interesting to me, were that there is a crucial gap on Nigerian perspectives and Black cultures in existing research on digitalization and on the impact of digitalization on democracy and deliberation. And I have to admit, this also applies to my own research, which actually addresses democratic deliberation in digitalized public spheres, in different kinds of public spheres, but and for the quality of democratic systems and their rapid transformations, but only from a Western, or almost only from a Western perspective. Although the island admittedly is in a weird way a post-colonial context. And this point of departure was of particular prominence and interest to me. A further learning effect applied to, that was interesting to me applied to Professor Kperogi's approach, but also to Professor Toyin's, Toyin Falola's approach to the learning effects of education and digital literacy that are slowly addressed in different societies, that are sometimes critically seen both from a US and from a Nigerian perspective. In addition to existing research, one particularly promising perspective from my viewpoint, which is currently in the European Union, is the explicit highlight that at least Professor Kperogi also took on the education or a lack of education and knowledge and the respective power imbalances. While this general topic is being addressed in Western academia and in literature that mostly focuses on Western debates, I guess what is mostly criticized actually is the comparative lack of knowledge in many Western debates and among the Western citizenry, particularly the European citizenry. And here, I think here an important or interesting discussion would actually also be from a broader perspective. How can we actually compare and reframe this lack of knowledge in different sectors of society? Because our findings so far from an empirical and conceptual perspective for the European society arrived at fairly pessimistic conclusions, and similar things applied in many cases to the US society. A further extension would be the discussion of decadence and the point of discussion of racism that was proclaimed for the EU. Here, I would be very much interested, on the one hand, in the same issue being discussed for the European continent. I believe that particularly due to the effects that are often proclaimed with regards to polarization of discourses that are facilitated by the structures of social media, we can expect that racism is actually much more prevalent, and many findings for separate public spheres arrive at this point. And this brings me to my almost last point. So the almost last extension that I would very much appreciate, or that I would find very interesting, would be also a more systematic assessment of diverse media, social media, and the way they are structured and facilitate different kinds of discourses. So one thing, our current research project here, for example, on climate change discourses, is very much focused on is the way in which polarization is facilitated, for example, by different social media, by different mass media, by the fact like by the way they are left or right wing oriented. This applies to findings from the US, but also to, or at least preliminary findings and ongoing research projects from Europe. And from that perspective, it'd be very interesting to see how these manifestations, political attitudes, and so on, actually are also facilitated by the structure of different kinds of social media within different public spheres in Africa, and then in comparison cross-continentally and cross-country. So yeah, last but not least, and this is maybe a general point, one thing that I would very much appreciate, I guess, would be an extended exchange also between these diverse areas of research that I just sketched out and the European, I'm not sure if we should speak of a diaspora, I'm not sure if that would be the correct terminology here, but the African parts of the population that are definitely, for example, very much living in Dublin, that are definitely lived in Berlin, where I lived previously. So exchange between these cultures and actually facilitating that in a systematic way in different sectors of education, in different public spheres, the issues of racism, the issues of education in at different levels of education, in different parts of society, in different social media forums. This would be a hugely interesting factor for me to also exchange between the US, between Europe and the US, between Africa and the US, and then also in the threefold relationship. And I'm ending with this complexity in a threefold relationship. I hope, despite this title, that my comments were understandable to you and provided you with some kind of insights. And I thank you all for attending this and for inviting me, Toyin, to this very much welcomed conference.
Thank you, Professor Floss, for your brilliant review, broadening the range of the book, suggesting other topics for us to do, and for locating the book in a bigger context of theory, media, new media, and digital media. We are very grateful. It's now my pleasure to call on my boss, the host of this conference, and the director of ACSUS-UP to give his keynote address titled "The Diaspora, Diplomacy and Soft Power Agency of the African Diaspora in and Australia and the United States." And it's deliberate that I'm not reading the bios of all these presenters because we've circulated them and we avoided reading the bios just in the interest of keeping time. Professor Isike, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Falola, for the chairing this so well. The title of my talk is the Diaspora Diplomacy and Soft Power Agency of the African Diaspora in the United States and Australia. So I've just done the slight amendment, just turned the countries around. So to make this talk less monotonous, I decided to present some aspects of it in my welcome address. And that's the advantage you get when you're able to do a welcome address and a keynote in a conference. And in that address, I highlighted the value of the African diaspora as connectors between Africa and the world, and the value that they add, through several brain-sharing initiatives which benefits, the continent. So I shall start off by now quickly unpacking the three key concepts of this talk, and these are the African diaspora, diaspora diplomacy, and then the concept of soft power. And hopefully I plan to use the examples of, the Nigerian diaspora in the United States and the South African diaspora in Australia to highlight how these African diasporas are foreign policy actors for both their home and host countries. So the first one, the African diaspora refers to the dispersion of people of African descent throughout the world, starting with the transatlantic slave trade, which forced the movement of millions of Africans to the Americas, to Europe, and other parts of the world. It also encompasses the voluntary migration and the more recent movement of people of African descent within and between different regions of the world induced by, conflict and economic hardships in the continent. Now, although disparate, the African diaspora has grown to become a significant global force with people of African descent living in nearly every corner of the world. Overall, they have had a profound impact on the cultural and social history of the world, as well as on the economic and political development of their host countries. African diaspora communities have also formed distinctive cultural identities and traditions, in music, in arts, food, literature, dress, and other forms of cultural expressions, which attract admiration and goodwill from their host countries, right? Now, diaspora diplomacy. In simple terms, diaspora diplomacy is the use of diaspora communities to promote a country's interest in the international arena. This involves engaging with members of a country's diaspora in the country of residence to leverage their networks, their skills and resources to achieve political, economic, and social objectives to pursue the advancement of the country of origin or home country. There are several scholarly works on diaspora diplomacy, but the one of Jennifer Brinkenhoff, 2018, is pertinent. Now, according to her, diaspora diplomacy encompasses diasporas as agents in their own rights, instruments of other diplomatic agendas, and intentional or accidental partners with other actors pursuing shared interests. Therefore, diaspora diplomacy is not territorially bound, and its agendas are fluid as they crisscross several cross-cutting interests between the countries of origin and the country of residence. Now, three important features of diaspora diplomacy distinguish it from public diplomacy more generally. First, the diaspora identity results in specific applications of diplomacy for which diaspora may play a unique role. Second, diaspora's responses to global crisis of identity and inequity yield particular motivations and targets of engagement. Third, diasporans may have an in-between advantage for public diplomacy. The in-between in terms of this third space I mentioned earlier that they occupy between their home countries or countries of origin and their countries of residence. The complexity of diaspora diplomacy is likely to increase because of circular migration, layered identities, and continued improvements and access to telecommunications or digital technology, if you like. It is the first and third features of diaspora diplomacy that Brinkenhoff talks about that I applied to my work on Nigerian Americans as soft power resources for Nigeria and their agency as potential foreign policy for both Nigeria, as their country of origin, and the US as their country of residence. I use the word potential here because in spite of the soft power resources Nigerian Americans constitute for Nigeria, their agency as foreign policy actors for Nigeria and the US has not been activated, first because they are not yet organized enough as a group to play that role, and second, because of the failure of the Nigerian government to recognize and use Nigerian American soft power assets that they have. And of course, these two factors impact on how the United States also makes use of Nigerian Americans as part of its foreign policy arsenal to achieve its interests in Nigeria and Africa broadly, given Nigeria's continental leadership role. Now, the same can be said of the South African diaspora in Australia, based on feasibility studies that I've conducted with my research partner there, as Professor David Mikler, who is also on this conference now as a panel chair. I will revisit this point of the redundant agency of Nigerian Americans and South African Australians if time permits a discussion of the challenges that they face. But the major one that is common is the absence of cohesion within country diasporas with the plural populations that they have and between the different country diasporas of our 54 countries in Africa. But to sum up this section, the main point is that diasporas straddle 4 diplomacy objectives that have soft power implications for both their countries of origin and country of residence. The first one is that they improve the image of their country of origin, okay, through what they do. Second, they secure the support of their country of residence, that's where they reside, for policies or interventions targeted to their countries of origin. And we know that the Jewish community in the US, for example, does this very well. 3, they influence perceptions of their countries of residence within their countries of origin, okay? And this is what enables, more migration from countries of origin to countries of residence through social networks. 4th, they facilitate material exchanges between the countries of origin and the countries of residence and support the settlement and reintegration of their compatriots in the country of residence when they do make this migration move. So according to Brinkenhoff, through the many cultural associations that diaspora associations form, diasporans can proactively improve the image of their country in their country of residence, or even internationally, depending on the power of the particular country of residence. So state and private sector officials in the country of origin may also target them for that purpose. That is when they are aware of them and use them effectively. So diasporans may seek support for a policy or intervention from and by their country of residence targeted to the country of origin. As Smith 2014 argues, this is an enduring feature of US foreign policy, as it has historically leveraged diaspora communities in the US to get insights for its foreign policy engagements with the country of origin. Our Vice Chancellor, Professor Kupe, mentioned the Presidential Advisory Council on African Diaspora, established last December as an indicator of the Biden administration's effort to engage and embrace America's African diaspora. He also mentioned that the African Union's declaration of the African diaspora as the 6th region of the continent is also part of efforts to engage African diaspora communities and to promote diaspora diplomacy. Clearly then, diaspora communities can serve as effective ambassadors for their home countries, promoting cultural exchange, trade and investment, as well as tourism. They can also provide valuable insights and expertise to their home countries on global issues, and help to bridge cultural divides. The last concept I want to, just talk about very briefly is soft power. Now, soft power generally refers to a state's ability, to influence others through attraction and persuasion, rather than coercion or force, in order to shape the preferences of other states through intangible assets such as an attractive personality, culture, political values, and institutions and policies that are seen and held as legitimate or having moral authority. This is the definition that Joseph Nye gives to soft power in 2004. It is often achieved through cultural, economic, and diplomatic means such as popular culture, foreign aid, or international collaboration. So soft power is considered an important tool in international relations because it can help build relationship and foster cooperation between countries without resorting to military action or other forms of aggression. There are challenges, of course, with soft power, and that one of them is measurability, but that's not my concern for now. Now, to the crux of my talk, the Foreign Policy Agency of African Diasporas in the US and Australia. Generally, the African diaspora has also become an increasingly important diplomatic and soft power tool for Africa. Many African countries have recognized the importance of engaging with their diaspora communities, abroad to promote their interests and increase their influence. This includes using the diaspora to attract investment, promote tourism, like I said earlier, and advocate for policy changes in host countries. Therefore, as diaspora diplomats, the Foreign Policy Agency of the African Diaspora is in the accumulation of soft power points for Africa. This realization drove me to ask whether the African diaspora can be categorized as a soft power resource for the continent. And this is how I started, the project of mapping their soft power attributes, starting with Nigerian Americans in the US in 2021, and then, South African Australians in Australia in 2022. So I spent 8 weeks in the United States in 21 collecting data from Nigerian Americans in 4 states where they are mostly residents, and then 4 weeks in Australia collecting preliminary data from South African Australians in Western Australia. And I will now present some of the findings on the soft power attributes and dual foreign policy agency of both these African diaspora communities in these countries that I mentioned. Now, note that both the Nigerian and South African diasporas are the largest African diaspora communities in the US and Australia, respectively. So let me start with the US. Now, Nigeria's soft power come from attributes such as its cultural exports. In terms of film, we talk about Nollywood, we talk about music, its dress, food, and other indigenous products. We can talk about its political and iconic personalities, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Fela Nicola Kokuti, Chimamanda Adichie, among others. And I can even add Professor Falola, to this list. Sporting accomplishments, international peacekeeping and mediation role, delivery of public goods through agencies such as the Technical Aid Corps, Nigeria's Afrocentric foreign policy and policy of good neighborliness generally. These soft power resources fall well within the 3 elemental scales of cultural attraction, political values, and foreign policy as espoused by Joseph Nye. Now, the question I sought to answer was, can the Nigerian diaspora be added to this list of soft power resources? Now, in the United States, the Nigerian diaspora has been a particularly active and engaged community. They have formed vibrant communities across the US with significant populations in Texas, in Maryland, New York, and Georgia. This is the order in which they appear in terms of where they are mostly populated. These communities have been active in promoting Nigerian culture and heritage, advocating for social and political change, and supporting development efforts in Nigeria. They have also been instrumental in building bridges between the United States and Nigeria, fostering greater understanding and cooperation between the 2 countries. In so doing, they help to shape perceptions of Nigeria and promote its interests on the global stage. Now, the targeted population of my study were Nigerian Americans who are high achievers in science, medicine, engineering, music, and film, literature, and sports sectors of the American society. I'm talking about individuals contributing to American progress and development, but also ipso facto inadvertently contributing to Nigeria's soft power credentials in ways that can help to counter the unfortunate global notoriety of Nigerians as criminally minded people. According to the Migration Policy Institute, in 2015, Nigeria is the largest source of African migration to the United States, with approximately 376,000 Nigerian immigrants and their children, the first and second generations living in the United States. All right. The results of a Rockefeller Foundation Aspen Institute Diaspora Program, RAD, the study of 15 immigrant communities in the US showed that the Nigerian diaspora are the most educated immigrant group in the United States and are also substantially more likely than the general US population to be in the labor force and to work in professional or managerial occupations. So Nigerian Americans are diaspora diplomacy and soft power agents in their own right, given their admirable accomplishments in education, be it in health, in music, in sports, including emerging presence in IT and politics. Most highly educated of all migrant groups in the US, because 61% of them hold at least a bachelor's degree compared to 31% of the total foreign-born population and 32% of the US-born population. No, they had the Nigerian Americans I talked to had professors in the highest ranked universities in every one of the cities I visited, including top doctors and nurses in the health sector. Now, their presence is also visible in sports, media, and communication. And the latest of these is their presence in politics. as we saw in 2020, where 21 of them got elected into the House of Representatives, and 5 of them, Nigerian Americans, are currently appointed as ministers in President Biden's administration. So there's a potential of Nigerian Americans becoming foreign policy agents for both Nigeria and the US. However, it is an underutilized potential, as they have not yet been able to organize themselves to use their in-between advantage for public diplomacy, like you will see close-knit and homogeneous diaspora groups in the US, such as the Jewish, Indian, and Chinese and Irish diaspora communities do. So let me come to Australia. Now, although Africa has been at the margins of Australian foreign policy thinking and practice, the African diaspora in Australia has been instrumental in promoting African culture, heritage, and identity through various diplomatic and soft power initiatives. These initiatives have played a crucial role in enhancing the visibility and influence of African communities in Australia. As I mentioned earlier, South Africans are the biggest African migrant group in Australia, at about 42% of the African population in Australia, right? Although this is mostly white South Africans, more non-white South Africans have increasingly migrated to Australia in the last 10 years. So the preliminary results of a visibility study of a broad spectrum of South Africans in Australia across, this was across the color divide, which we undertook, myself and Professor Mikla undertook during my time in 2021, show the following. One, that the South African diaspora in Australia have diaspora diplomacy and soft power agency, given their admirable accomplishments, just like we saw in the Nigerian case. And when I talk about the South African Australian diaspora, I'm talking about people of South African descent who are citizens and residents in Australia. They are making significant contributions to Australia's development across critical sectors of mining, of agriculture, of medicine, IT, and higher education. Many of them are captains of big business, vice chancellors of universities, and professors in Australian universities, which means that beyond the economic contributions that South African Australians make, they also add additional value to Australia through the education system. Now, these evoke admiration and goodwill from Australians, not only towards South Africans as people, but also towards the South African state. Now, all 23 South Africans that I interviewed across the country, I was staying in Perth in Western Australia, but I was able to conduct interviews with them online, and from across different states in Australia. They all told me that Australians see South Africans as very hardworking, goal-oriented, and focused people, right? So the South African diaspora in Australia have also established a strong sense of community and identity, which, though is fractured along racial lines, has enabled it to broadly promote South African culture, values, and traditions to the wider Australian society. Another related way in which the South African diaspora has exerted its soft power agency in Australia is through the establishment of community organizations and networks, which provide a platform for South Africans to connect with each other and to promote their culture and values to the wider Australian society through channels, including cultural events, social media, and community organizations. These organizations have potential to evolve into ideational and political blocs that can influence Australian politics and foreign policy towards Africa the same way that the Chinese diaspora community does in Australia. One of the most prominent examples of South African diaspora soft power agency in Australia is the annual South African Film Festival, which showcases the best of South African cinema to Australian audiences. The festival has grown in popularity over the years, attracting a diverse range of people from different backgrounds and culture. Social media has also played a significant role in enhancing South Africa's diaspora soft power agency in Australia. Through social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, South Africans in Australia are able to share their experiences and promote their culture to a wider Australian audience. So let me conclude. I think I have about 2 or 3 minutes, so I will just conclude by saying that the conclusion that I draw, that I want to make, is to answer the question that led me to this research in the first place, and which is the question of whether the African diaspora, using the cases of Nigeria and South Africa, can be added to the long list of their soft power resources. Now, although the study is still ongoing, especially in the Australian case, I say yes to the question. The Nigerian diaspora in the US and the South African diaspora in Australia have in similar and varying ways been instrumental, in promoting African culture, heritage, and identity through various diplomatic and soft power initiatives. These initiatives have not only enhanced the visibility and influence of African communities in both countries, but have also contributed to the diversification of the cultural and economic landscape of the United States and Australia. Given the inroads that Nigerians in the US have made into national politics in America since 2020, I can also add that the diversification can also spread to the political sector. Now, both diasporas can also evolve into foreign policy lobby groups for their home countries and resident countries, as we see in the Jewish and Chinese diaspora cases in the US and Australia, respectively. I would want to thank you for listening to me. Unfortunately, there will be no time for any kind of engagement, but I'm going to be attending all of the sessions, the ones I can attend, and hope that we can engage in one form or the other. I want to thank you for listening, and over to you, Professor Falola.
Thank you very much. I think this session still remains like 20 minutes, if I'm correct, which allows me some time to respond. The center and the topic, both are emerging ones, and we're already teaching them in some universities. I can remember George Washington, and also my university. We've been teaching classes around the US and Africa. And from the point of view of the US, there has been debates over the years. Should it pursue hard power diplomacy, or should it pursue soft power diplomacy? For those who criticize the US, it has the highest number of military bases in the world. In fact, you can now create a map of US military and naval bases in the world, and you are going to see the penetration of virtually the entire globe. And people have been posing the question, why don't you spend this money on soft diplomacy instead? With respect to our people, if there was time, we would have discussed whether it's possible for us to pursue the Jewish model. The reason why people say that is that they see the Jewish as just one, it may be misleading, one identity they pursue. They relate to them as homogeneous. In terms of policies, they tend to manifest that behavior with powerful, effective organizations to lobby and deliver their interest. With respect to Africans, people have criticized us heavily that given our fragmentation, nationalities and ethnicities, we lack a common voice. Those who have studied Houston, for instance, will say that how come with that high number of immigrants, Nigerian immigrants, how come they cannot influence the election of a mayor? And the argument they will make is that if on Monday Igbo fight the Yoruba, on Tuesday Yoruba Igbo combine to fight the Fulani, on Wednesday the Yoruba fight one another, on Thursday there's a difference between the Jebu and the Badra and the Oyo people, and on Friday there's Owerri East, Owerri Central, were not fighting one another. And on Saturday, Obi and Tinubu people are fighting. And on Sunday, Atiku Obi and Tinubu are fighting. Now, in that kind of fragmentation, using soft power to influence policies become extremely complicated. We cannot thank you enough, Professor Isike, for this brilliant keynote, for the cogency of the presentation, for broadening the data. I am aware of when you went to Australia. I know when you came to the US, because you also came to do your interviews in Austin, and you spoke to some members of our community. We thank you sincerely, and hopefully you will publish your findings so that it can become part of what we talk about. And I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to moderate this session. And I want to call on our host to tell us what we are going to do next. Thank you very much.
Lerato, over to you.
Good day, everyone, from wherever you are in the world. It is a pleasure to have you here with us today. So we're going to go into our next session, where we'll be split into breakout rooms. I will open up the rooms as soon as I'm done speaking, and you can choose the room which you would like to go into. As soon as the session is over, I will close the rooms and you will be given a 2-minute countdown, and we'll be automatically brought back into this main session, whereby we'll be briefed and we'll go back into the breakout sessions and then come back again for a closing. Thank you, everyone. I will now open the rooms for your selection.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. As you can see, my connection is not stable at the moment, and I'm very sorry for that. So yes, I think we should move on to our second panelist. And I'm very pleased to welcome Medinat Malafakis to speak. If you are here, please go ahead. Hello.
Hi, Laura. You forgot to join your breakout session, so you're back in the main.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I got kicked off. My connection's been terrible.
No problem. Which breakout was it? I can just quickly assign you to it.
since
Okay, please respond.
Yeah,
But let's see your video. Let's see your video.
Okay, all right. Can you see me now?
Yes, you are very handsome.
Says the old handsome man. Okay. Thank you. Before Farooq responds, I was thinking, first of all, about the fact that depending on your standpoint, you would always either reject any kind of writing, whether said in the most respectful or normal tone, or in a harsh tone. So it depends on the standpoint of the receiver. So a writer should always strive for communicating facts. I think that we also have a culture of respect, which I don't discountenance, I don't disregard, because it's part of our worldview and it's something that we should not lose. However, we must also at a point begin to question the relevance of a particular culture that produces docility in citizens, right? Our elders should at some point also merit the respect that they demand of those below them. And this is how it was in pre-colonial African relations between different generations of people. You merited the respect you got. If you were a leader, you had roots in the economy, and your position was guaranteed on account of your competence, on account of your wisdom, on account of your accomplishments. So if you have not any of these, you even in the past did not garner the respect of those below you. So the point I'm trying to make is that we can't expect, because we have a culture of respecting our seniors. Someone said, "Who respect EP?" As part of the lingua franca in Nigeria, that we have not been able to speak truth to power. We are not able to tell our leaders when they are not doing the correct things because of that docility. And so when it becomes strange when someone starts doing that, and then we say that, we know he's saying the truth, but he should show some respect, or he should show some regard for what exactly, as a scholar, or even as a journalist. You are supposed to be a harbinger of truths. You are supposed to be the people's parliament. Of course, you can communicate respectfully. Many of the things I've read of Farooq are just stating the facts the way they are. I don't know about harshness, but again, too, it depends on who's receiving and their own standpoint. That's how I would respond to that question. But I'm sure that Farooq will do a better job of responding to that kind of concern.
Nuruddin Lawal, are you still there? Can you? Yes, please. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Prof. I think I have followed closely Professor Kperogi's writing on the social media, particularly on Facebook. He just share his writing, especially his Saturday's writing on Facebook and some of his comments. I follow him closely. Again, we should ask ourselves, who is Prof writing for? Who is Professor Kperogi writing? Who is he writing for? And again, what is he writing? What is his motive? We have to place Prof ideologically before we begin to condemn or to say whether it's harsh or not. Harsh is a function of the way we look at it, our position as the previous speaker has said. For me, Prof Kperogi's writing is essentially needed, is useful at this point in time. We need a voice like him, and we need this kind of rhetoric to essentially draw the attention of our so-called leaders. I use the word so-called advisedly to the atrocities being midwife by them, and there is no any other language than revolutionary language, than what they call harsh language in quotes. For a young man like me, I do not believe the language is harsh. So thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Cynthia, what do you think? Cynthia is the director of IAGA. Cynthia, are you there?
Yes, Prof.
What do you think? Because you're also in this kind of public presentation.
Well, honestly, I do believe that when writers write, you're writing for a particular audience, but in the world that we live in, they're diverse. We have what we call the diversity of audience, because we never know how far or how wide the literature or the piece of work would go. But I also believe in very expressive writing. I don't believe there should be a particular template when it comes to how we express our opinions on issues, provided it's done with some sense of responsibility. So for me, I honestly do believe that in the world that we live in, especially for the younger generation, for younger people who read, they can sense when people are trying to be overly politically correct, and that in itself creates some level of doubt. When I talk with the Gen Z, they say they can, permit my word, they can smell crap in a sense from afar, like, oh, you're trying to just paint or make things look, you're not being honest, because for them, they believe in raw, sincere, open conversations on issues. And so I also believe that it's never really about harshness or whatever. It's more about ensuring that there is that responsibility that comes with every author, that you're quite accountable and responsible when you write. But I do believe in expressing the best way we know how to express. And most importantly, realizing that a lot of people now want to see some sense of, they want to believe that whatever you're writing, we can relate to it, and I can sense the honesty in it, and not just that we're being very, that would be the only comment I can, because first, I don't think at this point, I didn't want to say anything about Prof. You just like to bring me out, but that would be my thoughts around it. But honestly, for younger people who read and as we're trying to reach out to, they constitute the major population. I think that the way they receive any piece of work is quite different from the older generation. And so it's also important to put that in context when we write.
Thank you. In our panel, Professor Yeni made a provocation and regarding ACSUS. So in relation to the role of the state in protest, please, can you repeat your point and put it in context?
Who, me?
No, Professor Yeni.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me repeat the question. During the ACSUS protest, Nnamdi Kanu used Radio Biafra to orchestrate the burning of Lagos. And I can give examples of some of the things he said. He directed members of IPOB, BSN to properties belonging to Lagos State, properties supposedly or allegedly belonging to both Tinubu and Sanwo-Olu, asking his members to burn them down. And as he was given these directives on radio, almost in the same tone, the same manner as Radio Machete of Rwanda 1994 fame. All of these were bundled together as part of the ACSUS protest, and the presenter presented all this as part of from what I heard from him, what he called the anti-democratic human rights norms of the Buhari administration. And my question is, how do we situate the burning of Lagos as orchestrated by Nnamdi Kanu, ESN, and IPOB during the ACSUS as truly anti-human rights? do we, for instance, look at the banning of Twitter as, in the light of this kind of development, as anti-human rights?
Okay, does anyone want to respond?
Yeah.
Yes, please, Cynthia. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. I think I would look at this from three broad perspectives. One, how the states relates or interacts with protest. We know that the state in nature is tyrannical. There is no country where you see the state that is comfortable with protesters. I would say, oh yeah, I like to be challenged, because the state in itself, I mean, from our context, it's tyrannical in nature. And when it came to the ACSUS, there was that first, the state believing that the protest was a major attack or questioning of its power or its capacity and extent of its power. And so there was that. The second part is, it's also important in our conversations, we try to limit the tendency to generalize. And that's because when you hear things like Lagos was burnt, I get it's figurative, but I do also think it's important we highlight that there were specific facilities that were burnt. However, within the conversation around the ACSUS protest, it didn't just happen in Lagos. In fact, if you look at the INEX report on destruction of its facilities, it highlighted different states in the country where INEC offices at the local level were also burnt during the ACSUS protest. And so why I wanted to bring this is because we also need to also identify the fact that there were major losses during the protest, not necessarily because of the protesters, but because when there's a protest and there's a likelihood that there are elements that can introduce some level of violence, that we all suffer the loss. So it was in different states. It wasn't just peculiar to Lagos. So that's one part. Also say that within the protest, that there was that. Then the third conversation was also how you have violent non-state actors who try to manipulate vulnerabilities to facilitate their agitation. And I think that is where I would bring in the conversation around whether the Radio Biafra had some level of influence or not in the burning of some facilities in Lagos or some properties in Lagos, which may have belonged to one or two individuals in Lagos State. And I don't even want to talk about the monopoly of powers and how that also played out. Because, and that for me, those are important things to put into perspective in having this conversation. And why did I feel the need to bring these issues up? And because I know we'll continually discuss ACSUS, the positives, the negatives from that. One thing that is clear was that younger people who felt the need to protest and demand accountability organized organically to demand accountability, working with their own template, because first, they had felt that several movements had not represented the will of the people the way they wanted it, which was why there was this emphasis around a leaderless movement. If you notice, for a lot of them, they kept saying we have no leader, because they always felt that previous movements by the people had always been shortchanged by the so-called leaders. And so they wanted to have a faceless movement, which was why there was that emphasis. However, there is also a challenge to that. For everything that has a pro, it has a con, because what happens is when it comes to demobilize, there's a major challenge of demobilizing if you don't have some sense of structure in helping to demobilize. And so when it was protracted, it created an enabling environment for violent elements to take over the protest to some extent. And I do believe some parts of that violence was introduced by government. Some others were also armed non-state actors who saw an opportunity to leverage that vulnerability, which is where the instance of the Radio Biafra will come in. But just to even put it that even Radio Biafra has been banned several times, and that at this point, there are several channels that it's thanks to internet, it's becoming a bit more difficult to sort of regulate all of that. we can't totally say it is totally about that. But I just wanted us to just put all of this in perspective when having a conversation, because I don't believe in overgeneralization, one, but I also believe that we need to be a bit more balanced in the conversation. The NSAS protest is something a lot of young people celebrate till date, and we don't want to take that away from them. But did it have some challenges? Yes, it did. But are there lessons and learnings from that? Yes, there are. But perhaps the underlying question should be, what has enabled the protraction of this agitation by the so-called IPOB or their supporters? Because within this, we can't also remove the role of the state in enabling this prolonged or protracted agitation, because it's also around, they say when two elephants fight, the grass suffers, because at this point, the state also needs to begin to respond to where it failed in properly managing agitations within the region, but most importantly, where it failed in properly addressing the demands of its populace, especially as it relates to the sense of social inequality and injustice. That is also what we saw with the NSAS, that at the point, the government also should have understood the important role young people had to play in the society and looked for new ways to engage them through dialogue. But I still think that young people feel that the government, post the NSAS, has not really come up to take responsibility for some of the challenges that happened, some of the victims of the protest, but most importantly, to get younger people to the table to discuss and dialogue. But I mean, these are just general thoughts around that. But I do think we need to properly put issues in perspective and not create a sense of victimhood in a way, because at the end, we all are victims when the system fails, but there are things that create some vulnerabilities. And once the system is porous, trust me, armed non-state actors would look for ways to manipulate those opportunities.
Thank you. Lerato, how many more minutes do we have? Should we go to the breakout room? Lerato, announcement, please. Hello?
I think she had already put up an announcement that we should wrap up as we get ready.
How many more minutes do we have?
I can give you 2 minutes.
Okay.
To just wrap up.
Cynthia, thank you very, very much. You can now see why I call on you, because you're always very good with all this analysis, very impressive. Can we give the last voice to Martin Ihimbe when we all come back? And I'm glad we've used this.
Hello.
Let's give Martin Ihimbe. Are you there? Khadija.
Yes.
Okay. Martin, very quickly, and then Khadija, and then we go to our breakout room. I'm glad we've used this break period to extend the conference.
Yes, Prof. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to comment on Professor Kperogi's style of writing.
Okay.
And I think I read his column in Tribune, and I think he communicates to, even though some would say to the academic community, he equally communicates to those in power. And in many ways, I must confess that his communication has been well received. And particularly, I remember the last time I was in Nigeria, I was speaking to one of the national commissioners on what played out in Yobe and I think Yobe and Akwa Ibom. And I think Farooq's Professor Kperogi's intervention was received, and the government had to give us an explanation as to why the substitution was made. But in a way, the Supreme Court spoke in a different way. And again, Professor Kperogi intervened to the extent that the Supreme Court, whoever was at the registrar, it became an exchange between Professor Kperogi and this. And so I don't have a problem in his style of writing, provided he's speaking to those in power. If those on the street don't understand, I think Professor Kperogi is speaking for the interests of those who whatever has been trampled upon. So he's doing a very good job, and we appreciate him so much.
Okay, Professor Isike, can you make your announcements so that we can go to a breakout room? And if people want to enjoy this kind of collective conversation, I will plead that we extend the plenary. is not going to agree with me, I will just plead because I'm enjoying this collective conversation. Please,
Well,
what
we'll
can
get
you
back to that.
announce?
Yeah,
Okay.
we need to go straight now to the plenary. So when we conclude that, we'll come back to the sorry, not plenary, to the breakout sessions. So Lerato, please pop them up, and then I ask that the chairs identify their rooms and then go there, and then start once we have the speakers. If all the speakers are not in place, you chairs, please use your discretion to share the time between those that are available, so long as you keep 30 minutes for question and answers. Lerato, please.
I will be opening the rooms now. Please join from room 7 to 12, not 1 to 6, because we've already been in those sessions already. Thank you.
Larato, can you please direct people to go to the breakout room? Please. I went to one, I didn't see anybody there.
Hi, Prof. Falola. I had explained that room 1 to 6 was for the previous session. So now we're going from room 7 to room 12.
So room 1 moves to where now? Panel 1 moves to?
No, it didn't move. There's new panels now from panel 7. So when you choose from panel 7 to panel 12.
Can you please, if you are on this main room, can you go to a breakout room, please? Please, can you ask them to go to their breakout room? Emmanuel, Sandy, Ojo, Abani, Khadija, can you please go to your main room? There is no panel in this room.
Sorry.
Please move to your room. Please go, click breakout rooms and go join a room.
Lerato, is this room 11?
How are you, Austin?
I'm fine, thank you, sir.
Good morning, Prof.
More
okay, sir.
That's good. Mm-hmm.
The micropension plan is significant.
We are waiting our host, Professor Christopher Isike.
Good day. I was just waiting for everybody to join in. We will quickly take a 10-minute stretch break, and then we will be back for our closing remarks.
Okay, let me do what I did when we had break, which I converted to a panel. And I want to start with a comment that Professor Sanger Mossiker made very casually. During his presentation, there was a noise that came from the outside, call to prayer, an Islamic prayer. And that provoked some reflections in me. Professor Sanger, I don't know whether you heard me. I want to reflect on the comment you made when a noise came regarding the mosque. So I grew up in an ecumenical culture where we do not fight people over religion. But as we move forward, we began to fight over some of these religious issues. And in chapter 11 of this book, A Nation on a Boil, is a reflection on Professor Kperogi's comments on religion. When I released a piece on marginal identities, he sent me a short WhatsApp. What about atheists? We call them the no's. And I said I have no data on them. But I want to tell you one data. Things have gotten to a situation in some parts of the country that you cannot say you don't have a religion. So on Sundays, sometimes when people ask me what are you going to do, I will say I'm going to church. Because if I don't tell them that, I will go into trouble. So my people made me a chief, and sometimes I wear that Yoruba beads. Carelessly now, some people just wear it as aesthetics, which are not supposed to do. So, because when you wear that bead and people see you at the airport, they automatically know you're a chief. But now not anymore. Now, if you wear that bead and you don't go to mosque on a Friday, you don't go to church on a Sunday. If there is ritual murder 5 houses away, be prepared that you'll be accused of the person who killed for ritual murder. So the situation where even within our neighborhoods, they've taken away choices from us. You can't complain that somebody built a church close to your house. You cannot. Because the person will say you're a witch, you're a devil, you're possessed of paganism. If I have a friend who had to sell his own house that is lived for 14 years because it was sandwiched by 2 churches. So I could relate to that comment. And at the level in which we've now become a very intolerant people. So to use the binary conception that came up during the discussion, that we now tend to frame people, they must belong to something. And you see that in our binary, as Kperogi does, we talk about leadership. But one thing we may also begin to do is also to talk about the followership as well. Because they also have many of the problems that were criticized in Aso Rock. Millions of people also have those problems as well. And maybe as his writings develop, he can say, okay, let me now begin to attack the bottom as well, just as he has been attacking the top. Thank you very much. Matters arising from various panels. This is not the plenary, this is just a break. Matters arising from the plenary, from the panel, sorry. Matters arising from the panel, if anyone has an issue.
Carl, you have anything you want to pop in?
My hand is raised.
Okay, Kwalumi, please.
Yeah, thank you. We didn't have sufficient time to address the issue raised by Professor Yeni. The use of violence in resistance, the example provided by Nnamdi Kanu during the ACSUS protest, in which his followers attacked some government property, public facilities. That kept me thinking. What is, of course, with the example of Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, a lot of people go for peaceful violence. Oh, sorry, peaceful resistance. But violence has also proved to be another form of resistance. Of course, I'm happy the venue and host of this conference is South Africa. Violence was a weapon used by some members of PAC and African National Congress, ANC, during the apartheid regime. I am not standing for violence personally. I am talking based on evidence, available statistics, that violence has also proved to be another effective weapon of resistance. In the case of the ACN, they call their own armed struggle. 3 days ago, I was reading Toyin Falola's edited book on tributes to Nelson Mandela, and I read Falola's section, which is about 5 pages, the first 7 pages of the book, talking about Falola is reluctant to say that Nelson Mandela went violent. Falola says they were pushed to the wall. Also, Falola says peaceful resistance failed. Falola is reluctant to say Nelson Mandela went violent, but that was the fact. Nelson Mandela and ANC, they went violent in their resistance to apartheid regime. That was a similar attitude that Nnamdi Kanu suggested, going by what Professor Oyeni said. I am not for violence, but I am saying that it happens.
My boss is warning me. Carl, you wanted to say something?
I think Fabio was in front of me, but I'm pleased to jump in.
Jump in.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to say is that the NSARS movement was not about Lagos, and it was not about Biafra. It was about state violence. And state violence against civilians, we know from armed conflict location event dataset and other datasets like the social conflict dataset in Nigeria had been escalating even before End SARS. And so I think it's really important to say that. And I think, the reality of destruction or violence in some protest movements, often by provocateurs, is, a perennial issue. I would encourage people to look at Chenoweth and Stepan's book from 2015, where they looked at 300 resistance movements over the course of the 20th century and have found and confirmed since then that the movements that used nonviolence were more likely to succeed. This, however, creates a reason for why the state may want to undermine the credibility of those movements. So again, that's Chenoweth and Stepan's book, and they've continued to update their research through the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements. And I also just want to acknowledge the really important empirical work on End SARS by two scholars, young scholars who are present here, Khadija Sanusi-Gumbi and Zainab Olaitan, who has published on critical questions related to End SARS. And so I want to make sure that everybody takes a note of their bylines here.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to chair this closing plenary. Chris and we debated whether to continue, and they said after 5 hours from the South African experience, you are going to lose your audience. And I'm a workaholic. I can sit down here for 12 hours. And he won the argument and I lost, which enables those of us in the US. This is 9:14 at Austin. I was the one who said, let's start at 4 a.m. because I don't sleep at 4 a.m. anyway. But it has worked out, and they have a model to work with in Pretoria. And if possible, in future, they can add 2 more hours. Now, Chris, should I begin, or you want to thank your staff first? How do you want us to do this?
No, it has to be Kperogi doing a reflection, and then you would close and I will do the thanks. Okay.
The man of the hour.
Okay, well, good morning from here. This is 10:14 a.m. here in Atlanta. And I've been awake since 5:30 a.m. This is a strange sensation, I tell you. And I'm still trying to come to terms with what is happening, the book itself. And it's indescribably humbling when a vastly accomplished, larger than life, transcendental scholar like Professor Toyin Falola, about whom books have been written, in whose honor annual transnational scholarly conferences have been held, from whom I derive inspiration and guidance in my own scholarly pursuits, finds you worthy to write an entire book on and even organize a conference around it. When you consider yourself a mere mid-level, mid-career academic who is still struggling to build his work. It's an honor I truly, truly believe I am worthy of, but that I nonetheless embrace and cherish. Professor Falola's book on my scholarship, my newspaper columnism, and my online dialogic engagements, interestingly, comes at a time when I had chosen to impose on myself a moratorium on active Nigerian political commentary and social media interventions. And this resolve was occasioned by my disillusionment with the state of affairs in Nigeria, and the loss of hope that attended this disillusionment. I took a very deep reflection about my life and times and engagements, and I concluded that the passions, the energies, the commitments, the hopes, the aspirations that over the years I invested in Nigeria through my commentaries and my engagements were wasted efforts. And I thought I made no difference. I invited vitriol to myself. In some cases, I endangered my own life. For the last 6 or so years, I have not been able to travel to Nigeria to see my people. Every time I made an effort to visit Nigeria, people would tell me I have friends that I made in the course of my career and in my engagements who tell me, look, do not come to Nigeria. A former president actually called to tell me that if I had any reason that I wanted to travel to Nigeria, I should shelve it because my life was in danger. So I reflected on this and I said, in spite of all of this, I don't seem to be making any difference. It doesn't seem that anything has changed. And I felt that I was merely wailing in the wilderness and that no one of consequence was hearing me. And even when I thought I was heard, I didn't think I was making any impact. And I thought that the vitriol and the threats to my life that my engagements invited weren't worth it. That I wasn't making a difference, that I wasn't galvanizing anyone to set aside their primordial differences, demand good governance from whoever was in power, and all that sort of thing. So listening to several sessions in this conference and hearing about people engaging with my writing has been truly, truly humbling and has caused me to reflect and maybe change my resolve. In the last couple of months, a lot of people have asked me why I have been uncharacteristically quiet on social media. And I responded to a few people, a lot of people I did not respond, and I say, I'll write my weekly columns, but that will be about it. So I would say that, so it's coming at a very critical moment in my own personal evolutions about Nigeria. And I can't tell you how much this has done to me. But I don't want to dwell on this. This is a reflection, not just on the conference, the book, but on the changing ecosystem in the social media world. So many things have changed since Elon Musk, took over Twitter and changed the dynamics of social media. But before then, a few weeks ago, and Professor Toyin, Falola and I have related since at least 2004, as I said in my anniversary, the write-up I did on his 70th anniversary, and I had not the faintest clue that he was writing a book on me about my writing. Not at all. It was only a few weeks ago that I became aware that he had written a book that chronicles, analyzes, evaluates, and engages with my social, political, cultural commentaries in columns and social media platforms. And I tell you, I was at once honored, flattered, and appreciated in ways I had never in my entire life. And so this is causing me to ask myself the questions: if someone of Professor Falola's heft, symbolic heft and gravitas, notices my writing enough to find it worthy of not just his time, but of his scholarly engagement in a book form and in a conference. I mean, had I been underrating the value of what I did what excuse do I have to stop now? So in a way, if I resume my social media engagements, it will be in response, a direct response to what just happened today. And of course, the book itself, which I have been reading. And in a very strange way, it's making me learn things about myself that I didn't know, about how my culture, my upbringing, my background shaped my thinking. It's also exposing me to critical articles, critical responses to what I had written that I had missed. Because in the middle of all of this writing, I typically get hundreds of responses, sometimes thousands. And because of the volume of the responses, I just close my mind from even reading them. So the book is giving me an opportunity to get to see what other people have said about my writing. And I've heard a few of that here, for instance, about the tone of my writing, how venomous-tongued my criticisms can be, how stinging they can be. And someone from the University of Jos talked about the vocabulary, the diction, the elevated diction that he says misses a lot of people. Well, these are criticisms that I've had in the past. Professor Toyin Falola himself has told me privately that I should tone down the intensity of my language, and the response I always give him, and I still give other people who make reference to that, is the style is the man, as they say. And apart from being a communication scholar, one of my major interests is linguistics and rhetoric. And in rhetorical studies, I learned that one of the things you can do to get attention is to state things as they are. And there's something about me that a lot of people don't seem to appreciate, which is that if I can't say it as it is, I would rather not say it. And so it's something I'm working on, but I have not had success in bringing it to fruition. Well, but the social media ecosystem has changed, or is changing dramatically in the last few years. So even if I return to it, I'm going to meet it, it's going to be a new, an entirely new ecosystem. Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter has radically overhauled the morphology of sociality, of reach, and of influence on social media. Before his takeover, for instance, of the platforms, the notions of virality, which is when messages are passed from person to person without anyone paying for it, the messages get passed around as a consequence of their importance, and people passing around not because they are paid to do so, but because they felt the messages deserve to be seen by other people. That notion of virality is becoming dead right now. The Atlantic, one of the famous an age-old, time-honored magazines in America, wrote a controversial article a few weeks ago where it says social media is now dead. There used to be social networks. I say social networks died around 2011. And from then on, social media emerged, and that social media is now dying. They haven't directly linked that to Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, but I'm making that link in a paper I'm developing, which is that, for instance, I was verified on Twitter before Elon Musk on the basis of what Twitter calls notability. When he came, he called those people who were verified, and it was just 420,000 people out of the millions of people who are subscribed to Facebook. He called them legacy verification, and he said it was problematic and took it away. Now you pay to be verified. And when you pay to verify, your tweets, your engagements receive added visibility. So in the past, being verified conferred symbolic capital. It extended and deepened your organic reach within the social media ecosystem. Now it's a paid service, and to be read, to be heard, to be visible requires that you pay. And initially he was mocked and derided by a whole host of people for it. But that trend is taking over now. Now, Facebook itself, Instagram, and several other social media platforms are selling verification. I have been verified also on Facebook for a number of years. And the only criterion in Facebook too was notability. But now it costs with $15 every month, you'll be verified on Facebook and Instagram on their apps. It's $15 on their app and $12 on the web. And so it's not just that. Posts you can buy visibility for your posts, and Facebook calls that boosting it. And I call this the Muskization of social media from Elon Musk. And it's the commoditized face of social media that denudes it of organic sociality. Additionally, so now we've entered a completely different phase, and people who will be seen, people whose posts, people whose conversations will be seen and engaged with increasingly going forward will be people who have the money to pay or the willingness to pay. There are certain people who have the money to pay but do not have the willingness to pay for all kinds of reasons. And I'm one of those people. I would never pay to be verified. I would never pay to have my post boosted because I don't gain anything from, personally, from my social media engagements, from my engagement with the Nigerian public sphere. What I do is animated by altruism, by critical democratic citizenship. So even if I want to return to my former active state, I don't know how I'm going to fare because of these hurdles. And it's not just me. It's a new ecosystem that is just now emerging, with which a lot of people haven't come to terms with. The last reflection I'm going to do before I hand over is the emergence of artificial intelligent chatbots, such as ChatGPT and Google's Bard. They are also changing the ecology and morphology of social media, of sociality, of online engagement, of content, and of what we call search engine optimization. So increasingly, instead of people searching the internet to find material, they just go to a chat box and ask a question, and it gives them the responses that they want. But as it's now becoming increasingly clear, although of course chatbots are still at their very early inchoate states, and they're just now evolving, they're still imperfect. So I'm not sure if what we're seeing is going to be, it's a fair reflection of what they're going to be. But there's a concept called hallucination that we see on these chat boxes, these chatbots. I entered my name on ChatGPT, for instance, and it says that I have a center at Harvard University. I don't. It also says I have a press, whatever center in my university, Kennesaw State University. I don't. And Bard, Google's Bard, was even more outrageous in its hallucinations about me. It says that I have been accused of supporting Boko Haram, but I defended myself by saying I did it as part of my work. That never happened anywhere. There's also, my attention was also called to a book review about a book that I was supposed to have written, but I never wrote, perfect with links on Amazon. But when I followed the link on Amazon, the book does not exist. And it's a book about media and Islam in Pakistan, which I never wrote. I had no idea about. I have never been to Pakistan, never written anything about Pakistan. When it came, I was so alarmed. I called Professor Falola's attention to this. So a lot of these things are happening. So the tendency for these bots to hallucinate invent non-existent bits of information about people, about events, about places. Where do we go from here? What's going to be the future of content, of engagement, going forward? Because these changes are happening and we don't seem to realize that something really major is changing, and it's going to define and redefine engagements between the diaspora and the home, within the diaspora itself, and in our host countries. So I hope that my reflections will give us reason, something to cheer about, and to come to terms with the changes that are occurring right now. Thank you so much for the conference. Thank you so much for all of the great things people have said, the criticism themselves. They are part of growth, and I'm taking all that into consideration. And to Professor Toyin, Falola, I really don't know what to say. This is my Nobel Prize, because I mean, to have such recognition from someone of your notes, of your reach, of your capacity, of your respect, is just simply inestimable. And to the organizers of the conference, Professor Isike, whom I'm just getting to know more about, getting to read a lot of his work that I had missed, and to all the participants and people who organized this, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate it, and I'll work hard to justify, all of this going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. There's a note from Dr. Yegbile, who presented at this. He said, Professor Kperogi, you have made our department, now Faculty of Mass Communication, Bayero University, very proud. I left long before you got to the school, but your image looms large, and we are very proud to say we passed through the same portal. If there is a way for you to copy and paste this, that is a very remarkable statement from your senior in the same department.
Thank you so much.
I don't know how to save chats, but I will invite Professor Dr. Yegbile. Where are you? I saw him. Dr. Yegbile, are you still there?
I'm here, sir.
Dr. Yegbile is a very famous person. He's always appearing on Journalist Hangout. So you want to say something about your department that he has made proud?
Yes. I remember some time ago, one of my senior colleagues who read his column was talking about you, and I told him, I said, do you know that we graduated from the same department? He said, are you sure it's BUK that Farooq went to? I said, yes. He said, that's fine. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, like, I was just trying to pull your legs and all that. He knows that most of our products are either in the civil service or something like that, that they don't practice. And they don't. Well, now you have seen one. He is now a professor. He worked with the Daily Trust before he left. So it's not that he's only pontificating. He's a journalist and a teacher journalist. So I'm very proud of you. And anywhere I go, I always point that out that, look, you know, so and so pass through the same portal I passed through. And so we are very proud of you. And some of my colleagues or some of our classmates also, I think some of them are in the background. I told them about this conference, and we know what to talk, what to say about now. Thank you very much for doing us proud.
Thank you so much.
And those of you who watch Journalist Hangouts is always there. And one of the blog beasts is Utitoju, Journalist Hangout, wrote a blog for this book. So let me quickly correct one impression that your work does not generate the impact you are looking for, because that is not correct. Obasanjo and I have spoken about you. He reads your work. Ms. Awolowo, we spoke about you. In Abuja, anytime I go there to eat pepper soup, if I'm not careful, you will dominate the conversation. So if you are talking in terms of impact as transformative of a nation, I think scholars are not privileged. One of my early schoolmates became a state governor. And one day I left his office and I said, how come I'm not the state governor? That I would do better things than this guy. So I think our job as writers, you are doing it successfully over 100%. Whether that will now provide electricity for the nation, solve the joblessness problem, make politicians less corrupt, I don't think you should evaluate yourself on the basis of those transformations. I don't think it's going to work. In closing the book I wrote about Soyinka, I upset some people by saying his legacy may not be as long-lasting as what people think. That those political activism are fixed in time. And over time, nobody will remember those political activism anymore. If you mention MLK to African Americans, more than 60% don't know who MLK is. They don't know him. If you go to Western region, other than the statue and the cap and the glasses, they don't know Awolowo anymore. So, but in terms,
you are muted.
I've been talking all along.
Yes.
So you have not been hearing me.
Just
we heard you all along until we got to Awolowo's cap.
No, it's the system. So that even as great as Awolowo is, only if you go to any secondary school now, or Ahmadu Bello, people do, after a while, people don't remember us. And so we should, I think this is a statement of encouragement. The other thing is about dissents and disagreements, that we have to build a nation where dissents and disagreements are tolerated and appreciated. I received some WhatsApp comments. Why are you doing a conference on Kperogi? I said, why can't I do a conference on him? Why did you write a book on him? He criticized you before. I said, okay, what does it mean if somebody criticizes you? Even the Yoruba, they criticize God. One major proverb among the Yoruba is to say God himself is not wise enough. If a person has only one child and the child dies, you think he's going to abuse God every day? He will be abusing God. I mean, we say, God, why did you give me one child and you take it away from me? If you can abuse God, who are you? Who are you that they will not abuse? Did they not crucify Jesus Christ? Or did Muhammad not die on the way to Medina? Or the two caliphs, the caliph who wrote the Bible, what about Ali? They cut him into pieces. They cut the caliph into pieces. The origin of the name for soccer is about how they killed the third caliph. They cut him into pieces. They used his hand to be kicking his head on the street. So I think those of you who cannot deal with disagreements and criticisms, let us use this opportunity to say you should begin to think differently. Critics are not your enemies. They just disagree with you. If you remember when I raised a comment about the harshness of his language, actually more people said, no, it should become harsh. I won Agwabiaka say, yes, is that harshness that draws him into his writing. So we should accept disagreements as normal. We should accept dissent as normal. Isike, do you want some members to respond to his reflections?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. So, well, to people, senior people like Saka Mahmood, Sati Fashwak, I want to preach that you write on younger colleagues, people who are younger than you. This is part of what I'm trying to achieve, that we should promote the efforts of those that head of department, a professor should be writing about lecturers in his department, younger people. By doing so, we are extending their ideas and we are breaking away from gerontocratic cultures. Because that gerontocratic culture, we should also admit, as Isike said in his remark concerning elderocracy and language, is also setting us back. And if you look at the technology world, the internet world, this knowledge is skewed more towards people in their 20s, creating these innovations. And part of what I'm trying to accomplish with this book is to say that we should advance the knowledge, the scholarship of those who are coming behind us. And I'm going to call another conference in November, similar to this, to be held in South Africa on the work of Sabelo Ndlovu Deshani, who has been writing on decoloniality, decolonization all his career. And I put all his writings together. The book has been advertised, by the way, and Routledge is publishing it, Sabelo Ndlovu and African Decolonization. We are going to invite you back to a similar conference. Where do we go next? We are going to publish the best papers arising from this conference. So Professor Isike will be writing to you to submit your papers, those who want to, and we'll evaluate them. And Farooq will be surprised that I have 2 forthcoming essays on him and 2 unpublished ones. And those 2 forthcoming ones, they are in a book called Nigeria and the Politics of Everybody. Wow. And the argument is that everybody has a voice, and this voice is very important. And that it is by collecting all these voices that we are going to move ourselves forward. Thank you very much. Let me hand over to our boss, Professor Chris Isike.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Falola. Sometimes I wonder whether you're deceiving me every time you call me boss. So well, thank you, sir, for all of this. So you've heard it, the summary has been done. The main thing that Professor Falola communicated, which answers Abiola's question, is the fact that we are going to do a peer review of the papers and then select the best ones that will publish in an edited volume. We shall be in communication with you about this because it's one of the outputs that we consider very serious and we intend to really achieve it. So we hope that you'll go to do the work of writing out the papers, completing them, submitting them. We shall give you the timelines around this, and then also get you to do the work when it comes to the peer review process. We are not sure of a publisher yet, but Professor Falola will definitely get us one. He is a doing of publication, so no issues there. Thank you again, Professor Kperogi, for availing yourself and being here today for the conference. I thank all of you who attended. We had, I think, 64 abstracts. We managed to accept 60, And at the end of the day, I think we had 4 pullouts, so we had 54 presenters today. I'm told that some people, didn't show up last minute, so I really don't know the numbers now. But we thank all of you, the presenters. We also want to thank our chairs. We had deliberately picked people who had, relations or connections or collaborations, their research, their work with Nigeria, whether they be the United States, in Australia, Nigeria, anywhere, South Africa, and those who had connections also with the media. So the panel chairs were carefully selected, they were deliberately selected, and I'm glad that 90% of them showed up. Thank you very much to all of you. Our audience, we thank you. We had 435 people registering for this, but at the end of the day, we had about 90 or so. Not bad for an online conference on a Thursday. In South Africa, tomorrow is a public holiday. So we understand that some people have already gone on a long weekend leave. So the last set of people that I would really want to thank are the organizing committee who managed to put this together. I will call their names. For many of us, many of these people, it's the first time they're involved in organizing a virtual conference. We just got the ACSUS just got the Zoom account, and even our main administrator, Lerato, had to learn overnight to get this done, and she's done a very good job of it. So I want to thank Lerato Dube, the administrator for ACSUS-UP, for having sleepless nights, organizing and ensuring that this is done to this stage successfully. I also want to thank Teria Aposami, thank Makete Makamase. These are the organizing committee members now. Daniel Ekup Nse, Martin Ihembe, Paseka Gola, Kainse Mlambo, Damilare. I want to thank Olusegun, both of them from Professor Falola's team. Thank you very much, colleagues. We really appreciate it, and thank you for staying up to this time. I still see that we have about 58 people still on board. We thank you and look forward to engaging with you. Let me use this opportunity to also talk about the upcoming African Association of Political Science Conference, which is going to be held in Pretoria and from the 12th to 14th October. I think Daniel posted something, the link there in the chat. Please try and copy it, and we have until the 30th of June to accept papers. We'll be willing to accept papers that align with the theme. So please do your submissions, and we'll try and support you as much as we can. In fact, I am trying to raise money. I've got a part of that money to accommodate 100 people in Pretoria for the conference. So if you are going to attend, all you need to do is to pay your ticket. I will accommodate and at least provide breakfast and lunch for 3-4 days in Pretoria. So please make use of this opportunity. We still have a few days to go, 15 days before the call finally closes. So then, to reiterate what our Vice Chancellor said earlier on about the fact that our next, our second ACSUS-UP US Diaspora Diplomacy and Soft Power Conference will be held in person, also here in Pretoria. This will be sometime in 2025. And I hope that we'll still be connected and you guys will attend, and we will see where we have gone with this particular one. So on that note, I would like to close and thank you very much for coming, and hope that we'll keep the connections going. We'll continue to communicate with one another, establish new collaborations. And once again, thank you, and thank you, Professor Falola, for the idea. Thank you. And thank you for all your good comments, kind words.
Thank you. That's been a very good one.
Yes.
Professor Kperogi, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
That is, yeah.